if Trump wins, do you think Judge Merchan in New York sentences him to anything more than, I don't know, a fine?
He's going to give him jail. Because you and I both know that sentence will be suspended pending Trump appealing that. And
Right.
then I think Merchan will probably realize, too, that if he sentenced Trump to jail, Trump won't be serving it until he's done, being the president, right?
Right.
So if I'm Merchan, and by the way, it's within my judicial discretion to be able to sentence Trump to jail or prison. And if I want to treat him like every defendant I would probably treat, I'd probably give him some jail followed by probation, right?
Since it doesn't matter anyway. Welcome back to another episode of Highly Conflicted. I'm Hugo Lowell. This week on the Inside Scoop on TrumpWorld as we enter the home stretch of the 2024 presidential race. 1. Whether the fallout from Trump's Madison Square Garden rally over the weekend will cost him votes. And number 2, whether the overly rosy internals on both the Harris campaign side and the Trump campaign side is leading them astray. To break down the latest data points before Election Day, we're joined by Katie Phang, host of the Katie Phang Show on MSNBC. Welcome back. Katie's destroying her hotel room.
I know, I'm destroying my hotel room right now. I'm just trying to get the right angle. Sorry.
But we are in the final weekend of the presidential cycle. And it started with Trump on defense at the Madison Square Garden rally over the previous weekend. A comic blabbed out racist and crude remarks that took aim at Puerto Rico and Latinos and African Americans. And even the Trump campaign recognized it was a problem. It was not the closing message that they necessarily envisioned. And they quickly tried to distance themselves from at least the Puerto Rico comment. They didn't care about the other stuff that this comic, Tony Hinchcliffe, was saying about black people carving watermelons and Latinos being unable to pull out, and they were making babies all the time. But the backlash was severe, and several Puerto Rican celebrities, including the chair of the Puerto Rican Republican Party, among others, called for Trump to apologize, and it took him a few days to do so. And in the meantime, he got a 4-day negative news cycle. And so I guess, Katie...
Did I miss something? He apologized?
Well, eventually he distanced himself from it, which is as close you're going to get to an apology, I think, from Trump as you ever will. But TrumpWorld is seeing it as an apology, so we'll take it as a generous interpretation.
The latest Kofefi boy, that's what you're trying to say. When he said, it's some comedian, I don't know who he is that what you mean by that?
Correct. Yeah, I mean, look, it wasn't a straight disavowal, but it's as close as you're going to get from Trump. So if we allow him that generous interpretation, if we kind of take the first part of the week, the burning question, I think, is it going to cost Trump votes? Given people in this country basically already know that Trump shit talks, and some people actually like that about him.
Well, I think what you saw from the Madison Square Garden rally, though, was equal opportunity shit talking, but it also didn't go after the coveted Trump vote, which is the white vote. It's after the black and the browns, right? And so that's the reason why the answer is yes, he lost votes. Unequivocally, he lost votes. But you and I both know that Tuesday comes down to, I think it's just the people down the middle that either bizarrely remain undecided or are kind of waiting until Tuesday to be able to cast their vote. Maybe they're looking for litmus tests of how are things going in maybe swing states, et cetera. But I would suspect the number of people that have early voted, which have been astronomical numbers as compared to prior years, they are squarely in the Trump camp or squarely in the Kamala Harris camp, and never the twain shall meet. I think it's that very narrow swath of people down the middle that were affected by the rally at Madison Square Garden. And I think that he lost votes and Kamala Harris peeled off votes from him. There's only so much that you can say or excuse of his behavior. So when you see people, I guess you know what, Hugo, the real question is actually, how much does a celebrity endorsement weigh into a vote? Because we saw a lot of very prominent Hispanic celebrities renouncing their support and endorsement of Trump after Madison Square Garden. So I guess it makes you wonder, how much do voters actually listen and watch and are influenced by what celebrities are telling them that they're doing when it comes to politics.
And you don't think that the fact that a lot of Republicans or kind of Trump voters have voted early, that's not going to make any difference? And I only bring that up because, even on MSNBC, as we have both seen and talked about, there have been pockets of voters who are like, yeah, I voted for Trump early, and now I regret it because of the comments that came out of the Madison Square Garden rally. I didn't like the watermelon carving comment, or I didn't like the Latinos don't pull out. They're coming inside like they do to our country. But the fact that they had already voted early meant it was too late, and kind of Trump had already banked those votes. Do you think it came sufficiently late in the cycle? The fact that this rally came basically a week before the election, it kind of insulated him?
If there were enough votes, Hugo, that came from the I voted for him, but now I have regrets after that one rally that happened a few days ago, then in the event, if a big capital if Trump wins the 2024 presidential election, I have no sympathy for you. We're both going to be, not you and I per se, but those regret holders. We're going to be hanging out together, probably deported or in a mass deportation internment camp somewhere. So I can't feel badly for you. If you had to wait until Madison Square Garden to realize what a shit candidate Donald Trump is, I don't have any sympathy for you. And it wasn't like, you needed that to change your mind, right? I mean, it's not like the first time Trump has attacked minorities, including Hispanic minorities. And so, I mean, thank you for getting your conscience. I guess I'm sorry that you pulled the trigger prematurely for Trump, but I mean, I just have to hope that if that's the case, that enough people had yet to vote, and or enough people that maybe were saying my vote was never going to count, just go and do it anyway, right? I just think the other kind of layer that of complication, Hugo, is the fact that you can win the popular vote and still not be the president of the United States. I mean, and that's a whole other episode that we should do about the Electoral College, because I have thoughts about that. But I think it's kind of wild, right, that we're built on the premise of one person, one vote, and that's supposed to be how it's supposed to, roll out, and yet that's not necessarily the case.
So if you're in that camp already and you already voted, effectively no sympathy, because if that was what took you to renounce your vote for Trump, then you're already a lost cause. But so the negative headlines though did go on for several days, right? And in doing so, it did strike me, because I went down to, I had a crazy week, right? I was at the Madison Square Garden rally on the Sunday. Monday night, I traveled to Palm Beach to attend Trump's press conference on Tuesday morning at 10 a.m. And I was kind of thinking to myself, why would he be holding a press conference? Because the only question he's going to be asked about is about the Puerto Rico comments. And of course, he ended up not taking any questions at all. So presumably his team preempted that.
Because he was too chicken to do it, yeah.
Well, but Trump's team, was smart about it in a way that Trump was not, because Trump couldn't resist not talking about the rally. We talk all the time about things getting under his skin, and it was abundantly clear that the comparisons to a Nazi kind of rally got under his skin. He came out at the supposed press conference. Really, it was just him delivering remarks, and said, it was a love fest. There was love in the air, and so in doing so, he couldn't resist not talking about it. But his aides pointed the silver lining for them as best as they could spin it, which was, we had 4 days of the Puerto Rico shit, and as a result, it also counter-programmed, ironically, some of the Harris rally on the ellipse, because.
Oh, I disagree with you on that.
Okay, well, 100%. Okay. Let me make you the case from TrumpWorld and see what you say.
Okay.
So, by the time Harris got to the rally on the ellipse, Biden was a short step away from weighing in on the garbage comment, and regardless of what you think he said, whether it was supporter with an apostrophe or supporters, and whether he was talking about the comic or whether he was talking about Trump supporters in general, conservative media was already painting it out to be another deplorables moment, and so that was conservative media. Meanwhile, a lot of liberal media, while for instance, some of the networks did take the Harris rally, they were also still talking about Trump and Trump's Puerto Rico comments, and so the sliver of time and space that the Harris rally could occupy was made smaller. And as a result, the Harris rally really didn't end up being anything more than one night of news coverage. And the Trump campaign was like, look, in a way, we don't mind that because it's not the networks talking about how wonderful Harris is and how wonderful her economic agenda is, because inflation is coming down and gas prices are coming down in the final weeks of the election, and that is something that we don't want to talk about. We want to focus in on immigration.
So a couple of thoughts. One, I still disagree with you because you Trump, and this is where Trump's campaign, his advisors, et cetera, this is where their logic is just so flawed. Nothing that was being said about Trump vis-a-vis that Madison Square Garden rally was positive. Now you juxtapose that to the positivity you were getting from the Kamala Harris ellipse rally, from her closing arguments to America. I also think people also underestimate the power of the visual. And what I mean by that is sometimes people don't remember so much what you say, but what you see. And what we saw at the ellipse on Tuesday night for Kamala Harris was incredibly powerful. What, more than 75,000 people? I mean, it was so obviously eclipsing, no pun intended. I guess that was an ellipse, not an eclipse. But what Trump had in terms of his attendance at Madison Square Garden and what Trump had at his own inauguration, right? I mean, so there's something about the visual that is an inescapable, powerful effect on a voter. One, because I do think that we are all human, we're all creatures and we're human. And sometimes we are swayed, maybe not so much by a celebrity endorsement, but maybe by seeing that there's a whole bunch of people out there that look like me, sound like me, that are supporting a candidate that, you know what, just on her face is better than Donald Trump. Another thought that I had about this was, the pearl clutching from the Republicans is so hypocritical. It's unbelievably rich. For Biden, and again, context is always key, Hugo. The deplorables comment a la Hillary, Ron, and Clinton was back in 2016, correct? So this was at a time when, suffice it to say, we were sufficiently disgusted by Donald Trump by that point, by November of 2016, but we didn't know the full extent of his criminality and we didn't know the full extent of his morally eroded character. And we now have that. If you still want to vote for that, you're never going to be convinced by Kamala Harris's ellipse. You're just not. I think that's something that people have been laboring under, is this idea that we need to, quote, meet people where they are. I don't want to meet those people where they are. If you think that Joe Biden saying that people that support a racist are, that they're garbage and you're offended by that, one, you clearly aren't listening to what Donald Trump says about everybody. And frankly, including his own supporters. You and I both know, Hugo, you've been to Mar-a-Lago. Donald Trump would never break bread with a certain sect of his supporters. Let's be blunt, right? So I just kind of feel like you're never going to hear my messaging. You're never going to see reason. You're never going to see logic. And I hate to be so absolute because I know it drives a lot of people crazy for me to be so absolute and to speak in such stark terms. But I think that we're sitting here on November 1st having this conversation, and I'm looking at people getting upset about what Joe Biden said and saying, oh my God, how could he say that at the same time that Kamala Harris was preaching about unity? And I'm like, you know what? Because Joe Biden's right, that there is a group of people that support Donald Trump that really I would never want to be around or spend time with either. And so I just think that there's just like this completely hypocritical kind of outrage that's coming from Republicans about stuff that Joe Biden says or stuff that Kamala Harris says. And yet Joe Biden is not running for president of the United States anymore. It's Kamala Harris. So either, do the proper attribution and make her own up to what she's saying, but don't make her explain what Joe Biden has to say about it.
But do you think Biden put his foot in it either way? I mean, there's a reason why the Harris campaign has been very reluctant to have Biden go out there as a surrogate, because he ends up invariably getting pulled into these mini controversies over what he might have said or what he might not have said, and they take on a whole new story of their own, and it's not beneficial, should we say, for Harris. I mean, it took on a whole life cycle of its own. I mean, what were we talking about for 12 hours?
But not for, but number one, for not as long as the Madison Square Garden racism conversation that clearly took up more oxygen, and appropriately so. And maybe this is where the media fails Americans, right? Maybe is it newsworthy, Hugo? And maybe you answer this better than me. Is it newsworthy that we cover when Joe Biden says something that might be at the other end of the spectrum of what Kamala Harris says or does? Sure. Does that mean that there's massive miles of sunlight between the president and the vice president of the United States? No. Do I think that it merits a continued conversation on media about Joe Biden saying what he says? No. The guy is about to be done with his term of office. He's not running for president. Why don't you focus on what the candidate herself is saying? And when it comes to Trump himself, right? I mean, since that Sunday rally at Madison Square Garden, what has Trump done since then? He's almost fallen flat, busted ass on his face trying to open a garbage truck door. And then he seems to think that he's owning the libs because he puts his name on the side of a garbage truck. And he thinks that that's some type of, hey, rolling with the Biden kind of comment. I mean, please, it underestimates the intelligence of the American voter to think that suddenly now I believe that Kamala Harris thinks that they're all garbage.
Okay, but if I was the Trump campaign, I can make the same argument about Tony Hinchcliffe, the comic. It wasn't Trump saying that Puerto Rico was a floating isle of garbage. It was someone else. It was a speaker who spoke 6 hours before Trump did, and for Trump to be tarred with Tony Hinchcliffe's remarks is just as unfair if you're going to say that Harris shouldn't be tarred by Biden's comments. I can see that.
That is a false equivalency that you're putting forth.
And why
Hinchcliffe is speaking at a rally for Donald Trump. It's not a roast of Donald Trump, one. And two, if Trump didn't think, and this is where I think the connect the dots failure occurs for people. If Trump didn't think that what Hinchcliffe said was so bad, then why the hell would he backpedal from it and pretend like he doesn't know who Hinchcliffe is? Just own it, Donald Trump. That's the problem with Donald Trump. He's too chicken shit to own his racism sometimes, because he does see that there was negative fallout from it. And so I just don't see the Biden comment being a direct reflection of Kamala Harris. I think, again, context is key. When and about whom was Biden saying these things? And listen, if this was Biden doing a stand-up at a Kamala Harris rally, I guess maybe you and I could have a similar vein of thought on it, but I have to respectfully disagree. I just do not think that these are apples to apples comparisons at this point.
I think that's fair. I think if Biden was speaking at the Ellipse rally and said that, it would be more comparable to Hinchcliffe at the Madison Square. I think that's totally fair. But I also think it was an unforced error. Like, as someone who doesn't really have skin in the game, or tries to have as little skin in the game as possible, because we all have kind of at least opinions, and as a reporter trying to address this, I'm trying to think.
I think you're right. By the way,
was there a net benefit? I don't know if it was a net benefit.
No. Biden is. But the fear with Biden is the unforced error, 100%. I don't disagree. But I also think we're back to that narrative that was just so prevalent before Kamala Harris's candidacy was announced, which is, are you fairly comparing Joe Biden to Donald Trump when it comes to speaking gaffes? Let's be honest, right? I mean, I'm not saying that Joe Biden is Clarence Darrow and the most eloquent guy, but I think if you compare to what Donald Trump is incapable of doing when it comes to just basic speech patterns, I do think that Biden comes out net positive as compared to Donald Trump. So yeah, I do think that there's a valid concern that maybe Joe will say something that could be misconstrued or maybe is a potential open mouth insert foot moment. But again, I just think that we get so mired down in what was it? Who somebody said this the other day? It was like, was it Van Jones? They were like, Donald Trump is lawless and Kamala Harris has to be flawless, right? I think it's an incredibly unfair standard. And maybe if you and I were having this podcast episode 20 years ago and there was this more like gilded lily idea of what the presidency was until Donald Trump completely ruined it for us, then maybe I could say, yes, there's a level of perfection that has to be achieved. But we are now looking at an office that has been denigrated by the sheer presence of Donald Trump. And I just don't know how much people revere and respect that office anymore. Sadly.
I think that's a good point. And it's reflective kind of, we talk a lot about Trump reducing the standards for everything. And one thing that I noticed this week in doing some reporting on this is what Trump's going to do on election night. The Harris campaign has basically come out and said they expect Trump to declare victory on November 5th. Even
before the end, right? Yeah.
Prematurely, regardless of if he's won. And kind of when you put this to the Trump guys, it's a collective shrug. I also spoke to Steve Bannon after he got out of jail. Yeah. And, one thing
Did he lose any weight when he was in prison?
Yeah, I think he did actually. Clearly, the commissary was not as delightful as the embassy, which is where he tapes in his war room.
You just reminded me about something. Go ahead.
About the commissary?
No, you just reminded me. I was wanting to follow up about the fact that Bannon still has. Remember, we were talking the other day about Bannon's state criminal case that was not a federal pardonable case. That is still coming up in the Manhattan DA's office is prosecuting on his fraudulent theft on the Build the Wall scheme. I'm just wondering what's going on with that case because I know that he wasn't able to escape exposure for that one. So I was just wondering how quickly he might be going back into custody.
Well, actually, that case is looking bad for him because one of the co-defendants he was charged alongside flipped and became a cooperating witness. So things are not up in Bannon world on that count. But coming back to election night just for a minute, Bannon's kind of take.
Oh, by the way, Bannon's supposed to go to trial. I mean, this is an older article from August 23rd, Hugo, but it says Bannon's motion to dismiss was denied, so his trial should begin on December 9th, just 6 weeks after he is scheduled to be released from federal prison. It's Christmas. Anyway, go ahead.
Well, aren't we also due back in Fulton County in December for the appeal?
The 11th Circuit Court of Appeals has the oral arguments on Trump et al.'s disqualification, Judge McAfee's refusal to disqualify Fulton County DA Fonnie Willis. I want to say that's like December 6th or something. I'm looking that up now so that your listeners can know what's going on.
But it's not the 11th Circuit, right? It's the Georgia State Supreme Court.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, it's the Georgia, because there's also
the 11th Circuit with the 11th
Circuit
documents
for
case.
The classified documents case that has not been set for oral arguments yet.
But on Bannon with election night. This is invariably what happens because we get distracted by other.
I know. I'm sorry. That's my bad. I was just really curious about when that's going to happen because I feel like people still want to know, Hugo, what's happening after Election Day, right?
I think it's going to be if it's close in some of these races, and actually while we're on the topic of Bannon, two things. So number one, on election night, his response to whether Trump should just declare victory. Bannon is openly now saying that it's just a throwaway line. Who cares? Trump should just do it. There's no downside risk for him, which I think kind of shows, just 4 years ago when Trump did this or was even planning to do it, it was a really big deal. Now, collectively, the entire kind of Trump world and also I think everyone else just shrugs and expects it to happen, which is just kind of extraordinary and many for just a number of reasons. But Bannon also wants to play a leading role if Trump loses in contesting the election results. This is his bread and butter. This is what he wants to do. He wants to reactivate lawyers, his kind of election integrity lawyers to contest results in all these swing states. And so I think Bannon is shaping up to be increasingly potentially influential and playing an outsized role in all of this than I think people might otherwise realize.
I needed my reading glasses to be able to see. December 5th are the oral arguments in the Fani Willis Georgia State Court of Appeals issue.
And actually, kind of what happens to that if Trump wins, do we think? Just on the legal, because it is fascinating. If Trump wins, my bet is on the classified documents case, the 11th Circuit eventually will just let that go. I mean, for no other reason than Jack Smith will be fired immediately, as Trump has promised.
Yeah,
but
he said he would do it within like minutes, right? He's like, if I get reelected within minutes, I'm going to fire Jack Smith.
But on the Fulton County case, which is a state case, which isn't a Jack Smith case, where do you think that goes? I mean, if Trump wins and is the president-elect, what happens to a case like that?
He still makes the immunity argument.
So he goes to... Well, but there's two levels, right, in Fulton County?
Procedurally, well, you're talking about Fulton County.
Let's take that first, because that's the first one.
I want to say the only thing that's been dealt with in Fulton County on a substantive... I'd have to go back and check. I don't know if Trump actually filed a motion to dismiss based on immunity. Did he? In Fulton County already?
I don't think he did, because this is just the appeal on
the disqualification
of Fani Willis.
So I think what would happen is it would go back to McAfee, and McAfee would have to make a decision
on whether he would pursue it.
Yeah, because you remember how Trump filed the presidential immunity motion in the classified documents case, but the judge didn't even get to it because Judge Cannon.
Yes.
Yeah, remember? So Judge Cannon didn't even touch that. Cannon only touched it on the appointments clause and the appropriations clause issue. So she didn't even go after that yet. But I could see McAfee actually denying the motion to dismiss for presidential immunity and that going up and that winding its way back up. I think it could still go to the Supreme Court.
But wouldn't it be in limbo the moment Trump takes office because...
Well, because you can't prosecute a sitting president of the United States.
So it would just be in limbo for 4 years.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's why you and I have talked about this before on my show and in other kind of venues where that's the other thing. Like, the lawlessness is a key component of the Trump candidacy, right? We've talked about how he's running to stay out of prison. He's running to be in a position of power to be able to dispose of his criminal cases so that he doesn't have, any continuing exposure. That's the real danger.
I think people forget sometimes that the backdrop to Trump launching his presidential bid was Merrick Garland moving to appoint a special counsel. Trump saw that headline and he rapidly moved into sixth gear to announce his candidacy. If people cast their minds back to 2022, Trump actually announced his presidential bid weeks earlier than some of his advisors and allies had hoped, because he wanted to get ahead of the Jack Smith news. And it was always predicated on trying to get out of the criminal cases. And I think once you remember that that's how this has been set up from the very, very start, when he talks about, a retribution, but also be like, I'm running for my freedom, he's literally running for his freedom. He is like, if he loses this election, he knows he has a world of legal hurt, both in the January 6th case, which has not been dismissed, and Judge Chutkan appears very ready to take to trial as to the best of ability, and also the classified documents case, which could come roaring back.
So here's the other wrinkle. The procedurally concluded in terms of liability determination by a jury of the Manhattan DA's case, because Trump can't really appeal anything right now because he's got to actually get the sentence completion done. And Judge Juan Merchan still has to sentence Trump for his 34 felony convictions on November 26th or something. One of those days.
Month. Yes. I want to say it's the Monday or the Tuesday before Thanksgiving week.
So you've got that as well, right? Like
26th.
You have
Sorry,
that.
The 26th. Yeah.
Will come after a general election on the 5th. And then if Trump wins, what happens to the actual sentencing? He can't serve his sentence.
So let's play that out though.
Right?
If Trump wins, do you think Judge Merchan in New York sentences him to anything more than, I don't know, a fine.
He's going to give him jail. Because you and I both know that that sentence will be suspended pending Trump appealing that. And then
Right.
I think Mershon will probably realize too that if he sentenced Trump to jail, Trump won't be serving it until he's done, being the president, right?
Right.
So if I'm Mershon, and by the way, it's within my judicial discretion to be able to sentence Trump to jail or prison. And if I want to treat him like every defendant I would probably treat, I'd probably give him some jail followed by probation, right?
Since it doesn't matter anyway.
I mean, I always anticipated before Rashawn delayed the sentencing, which you and I talked about before, I think maybe on your inaugural episode where I was like pissed. I was like, I don't think that's actually very fair that he delayed it. Pissed is a little strong. I think I was just irritated. I mean, look, fundamentally, Mershon could have sentenced him to prison weeks ago and suspended entry of the sentence while allowed him to remain out of custody and allow him to not have to serve a sentence until his appeal was done, right? So I mean, there was a lot of stuff going on that Mershon could have managed back then, which is why I still think though he's still going to give him some jail followed by supervised release is what I think.
And all of which kind of brings us back to election night, because as far as my reporting goes, the Trump campaign's feeling actually quite confident going into the final weekend based on their internal polling that has Trump ahead in actually every battleground state, which is funny because the Harris campaign's internals also have Harris up in every battleground state. So someone's going to be wrong here, but maybe it's all within the margin of error. So maybe really actually no one knows anything.
We're not going to know for at least a few days, and I think people need to understand that the management of expectations is important. As you listen to this episode of Hugo Lowell's amazing podcast, I cannot imagine.
I love it when Katie calls me amazing.
I know, right? There. Although I would like to be optimistic, I just don't think you're going to see the type of blowout numbers that would allow anybody validly to declare themselves a winner on Tuesday evening. I think we're going to have to wait and see as more ballots are counted over the span of the next maybe 3 days or 4 days. It just depends.
And it is quite interesting, actually, just some reporting and scuttlebutt from inside TrumpWorld. There does seem to be a sense this time that Trump probably should just declare victory if he's up by several 100,000 votes in Pennsylvania. And it's a credible argument for him to say, yes, we're about to win, like we're on the winning track. That being said, there is, for the first time this cycle, a sense that if Trump is not ahead by very much, that he shouldn't come out and declare it because it will make him look stupid. But it would also, more importantly, make
listen to them.
Well, more importantly,
he's not going to listen to them. Stupid. He's going to declare victory no matter what it is. I'd be curious to see what places like Fox News do, though. I want to know if Fox News, how they manage the returns and stuff.
So what happened in 2020 is, as far as I understand it, there were several of the more kind of OG 2016 Trump people around him whispering into his ear, like, just go and declare it anyway. People like Bannon, other inner circle people. And this time around, those people aren't there. And it seems to be that Susie Wiles and Chris LaSavita, who by all measures are more pro than maybe the previous gang in 2020, are hoping that if no one is whispering just declare, that you won into his ear, maybe he won't actually go ahead and do that. Because there is something about Trump where he does kind of like to make decisions by committee sometimes, especially the big ones. He does canvass around. And if he canvasses around and everyone's like, don't do something, or we're going to resign or something, then he actually ends up not doing it. And actually, we've seen this over and over again, even in the post-2020 election period with DOJ, when he was like, I'm going to make Jeff Clark the acting attorney general, and the entire DOJ leadership threatened to quit, and Trump ultimately backed off.
But I don't think anybody's going to threaten to quit, though, Hugo. And I think the problem is the following, which is you've got sometimes for Trump, it's the loudest person in the room, though, right? And so you may have a Susie Wiles and maybe a more like rational actor, but then you have Steve Bannon out of prison, right? And so Steve Bannon, as we know, was a critical part of the stop the steal, big lie, etc. Right? And so I just kind of feel like it's the louder, more aggressive voices like the Steve Bannons that are going to create the momentum for Trump to be like, yeah, absolutely, I won or whatever, right? And we know that Trump is impulsive and he's not going to want to listen to. I don't think he has any better angels, but like he's not going to want to listen to that.
Well, all I can say is Susie, Wiles, and Chris are doing their best to shut out Bannon world. I think in part because they know that if Bannon does get Trump's ear, Bannon may well just get his way. So there is definitely a concerted effort to keep people out of Trump's immediate vicinity. We saw it. We saw them do it with Laura Loomer as well. We saw there being at various points in this campaign an effort to cut people out who were more incendiary or bomb throwers or controversial, and they have succeeded by and large. And so I think that will be Susie Wiles's last attempt, last whatever you want to call it, her final sacrifice.
Song.
Yes, to protect not only Trump but also her own reputation. Because if Trump goes out and does something crazy and it causes the entire campaign to look bad, it will make her look bad. And
that's a whole other conversation. Listen, there's a whole other podcast episode about what I call the taint. And not that way. The idea that if you affiliate yourself with Donald Trump, you are forever tainted. And I just don't think that you're able to pick yourself up from that mud. I think you come up with, it's not even fleas. I don't even know what you come up with, but that's just my 2 cents.
Where will you be election night, Katie?
I will actually, so I'm currently in New York, but I will be in Miami, Florida. Decidedly very red place, but I'll be there, and I'll just kind of be watching and seeing like what happens. And in the meantime, praying for people to not vote against their self-interest. I'll put it that way.
And what are you looking at specifically, if anything at all?
I mean, I'm intrigued by the early numbers on the number of women that are voting. And so I'm very curious to see if my gut tells me a woman is smart enough not to vote against her self-interests. And so is that hypothesis, as we test it, as the numbers come in, that's what I'm focusing on, because we've heard that the early numbers are resoundingly women. And so I want to believe that means that these are women for Kamala, even if you're a Republican, that you're not going to vote against your self-interest if you're a woman, and you're going to be voting for Kamala Harris. So that's what I'm looking at.
So I will just say that some of the people in the Trump campaign are hoping that the early women vote, especially suburban women, there is also going to be a subset of that group. I mean, they accept, by and large, it's probably going to break for Harris, but
yeah,
there is a small, they are holding on to hope that a small group or a larger group, if anything, will be like, you know what, I just don't like the woke stuff. I don't like the whole transgender stuff, which seems to me like they're smoking a little of their own supply here.
But the transgender stuff?
Yeah, look, there's a sense that secretly a lot of women don't like, or a lot of mothers don't like their kids getting indoctrinated with, transgender rights sort of rhetoric.
Now, I'm going to tell you that's such a false flag, 1, and 2. I'm going to tell you that the Moms for Liberty movement, which has been a big push for the anti-transgender, anti-LGBTQ, et cetera, they have done very poorly in recent elections for those types of candidates, et cetera. I think that movement has it's still around and it still has some teeth to it, but I don't think it has the type of juice that it used to have. I don't think that that's enough. I think a woman's individual right to decide what happens to her body, her womb, her vagina far outweighs any concern about whether or not this stupidity that your kid goes to school as a boy and comes back a girl. Again, the underestimation of the American voters' intelligence sometimes confounds me. Well,
especially and multiple people have kind of made this point to me, which is, for the first time on abortion with Roe v. Wade, white women lost rights as opposed to other minorities losing rights. For the first time, it was white women who had basically rights afforded to them increasingly in the last part of the 70s, 80s, 90s, like the right to vote, opening a credit card without, by their own accord. And then for the first time under Trump's Supreme Court, they lost the right to abortion. And I actually thought in framing it that way, in terms of losing rights as opposed to gaining rights, was a very astute way of thinking about how it might play into suburban white women's psyche.
I guess we will have to see on Tuesday.
We will find out. Well, Katie, thanks for joining us again.
Always.
And we shall see on Tuesday, election night, also on MSNBC, and you will have your show Saturday and Saturday, bookending this week.
Tomorrow, I have a special voter panel, and then I have Robert De Niro, and a last-minute edition, I have John Legend joining me from Ohio. So it'll be a little bit of a star-studded Katie Phang show tomorrow.
Well, we will be watching, but thank you for joining us, and I'll see you on the other side.